All right, Venkatesh. Thanks for your time today. So I've got your CV in front of me. So why don't we start up with your experience, what your aspirations are, and then we can start working on it.
Perfect, yes. So I would say I have collectively 4.5 years of experience now. So how I started my career here is like I started it as like I was an intern developer. So I'm a very initial like 3 to 4 years back I had worked on Flutter, like which is stable now, which was not stable when I was using it. So that was like 3 or 4 months when I was a developer. Then I made a switch to networks. But I would say I'm a little person who likes getting into technology. So I got an opportunity to work for networking. So I worked in a network company. So this company, which I've referred here as GMAC Technologies, it is an ISP. Like we are an ISP provider. So I was the person who was like the backend person. We have then this later this company was sold to a government company. I cannot disclose the names. So we were working on Cisco routers, Cisco switches. So our thing was we had tie-ups with 2, 3 ISPs where we have to make sure that the reliability of the ISP is good. We don't want fluctuation because nobody wants internet to fluctuate. So I was there. I have also trained a couple of people for CCNA. I'm not a certified CCNA or CCNP, but I am trained to CCNP in routing and switching. So that is what my first that was my first professional experience. Second is when I joined it is a fintech based out of Chennai in India. So my role there was more like a cloud and a security engineer. So we had it's a completely AWS hosted organization. So we had a close to 30, 40 instances. Like then when I like being into AWS. So that is when there were many tweaks which I did. So initially we had our servers hosted on AWS using MySQL. So I requested them to switch from rather than us having the responsibility, let us have shared managed services of AWS, which is RDS. So we switched from normal EC2 to RDS for MySQL. Then for the SSL certificates, we used ALB for the ALB SSL ACM basically of AWS to for certificates. So that is when there were some changes with it. I wanted to change it from we were on GoDaddy, so I wanted it to be used on Route 53, but that was not possible. So I have worked on if I have to put in on services which I have worked on that time, that I would say it was like some services of VPC, which will be ALB, NLB. I've not worked on gateway load balancer. Then I would say NAT gateway because everything was like we would have 2, 3 public subnets and rest would be in private to have API connectivity. Then EC2 we had this thing a long term 1 year reserved planning resources that was there for EC2. In EC2, we had this backup policies, everyday snapshot, AWS backup service we used for backup. Then we used RDS, then S3. S3 we were on EBS initially, like entire storage, which is 3 TB, 5 TB, entirely was on EBS. Then we changed like only hot storage to be on EBS. Anything which is more lately used should be on S3. We
Mhm.
didn't have the like the glaciers or something like that. That was in the roadmap. Then right now I'm not the part of that fintech. Now I've moved out, so I'm a small part of which I've not mentioned on the profile. So the company which I'm working in right now, I'm the cloud security engineer. So we have a homegrown SIM here. So this is hosted on this is a mix of AWS and private servers. So we have a couple of private servers where we do the testing. So I have done small 2, 3 tasks on EKS. ECS was little complicated since I am interested in getting into containers, but I have not got too much of experience doing that. So I've done 2, 3 small tasks on EKS. Then infrastructure as a code, I am little more comfortable with cloud formation. I have deployed like couple of cases using cloud formation. Terraform not great, like small using ChatGPT or Google. What is the normal thing for public subnets? So that is what my profile has been. I would say it is like close to 4.5, and my profile resonates around network, cloud, and cloud security here.
Okay. So what I understand is that you are more towards an infrastructure security architect. So
Yes,
that's what your aspiration is, right? So that's
yes,
towards the infrastructure and security part.
true.
All right. So see, how about are you planning to move to any sort of application side of the builds and or- is it, are you trying to focus only on the infrastructure or moving on to the application side as well?
So I have done like I would say some 4 months of DevOps too. So my target now is to move towards DevSecOps and cloud security.
Okay, right. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So let me ask you something on the security itself then. So tell me about, let's say you got a 3 or 4 tier application. So
Okay.
so if you're given an application from scratch, what are the different layers of security that you would put in to ensure that the application is very, very secure? It interacts well within its own network, but it is very absolutely very well security proof. So can you
Oh,
start layer by layer? So
perfect. Yeah.
you've got database, you've got application layer, you've got your um, the front end layer, you've got APIs, you've got microservices. Just confirm to me what are the different layer by layer security that you would provide.
Okay. So for security, we know that there's no one silver bullet which will solve all the purposes. So first layer, or like if I have to start from this thing, first is the host I would protect, be it the endpoint, be it the user. I would start it from the user first. So the user has to know what is his boundaries, what is his use case, and you should provide the user only those accesses or only those uh, like he should be allowed to go only those places which he's authorized to do. So that is when first user level training is required. Then you need endpoint level security, which you can have an XDR or EDR. Second thing, I would say anything in the network level. When I say network level, not necessary of the place where he's working from, he might be working from home. When I say network level, I'm referring to the AWS network level here, which is the VPCs. So on the VPCs, we have to make sure that we shouldn't allow all outbound traffic. Maybe probably here we should allow only those subnets or which is required. Or let's assume I am communicating to probably, let's say, Paytm for my payment gateway. So Paytm will have some set of IPs from where the traffic will be allowed. So if they have like for 50 or 60 total services which they are interacting with, which the application, only those restrictions should be required, and any other, like they will have mentioned amount of IPs from where the traffic will be coming. Their subnets are defined. Anything which, if you're having DDoS from, let's say, another country, your company is based out of India, you have Indian customers, but if there are attempts from, let's say, Pakistan, Israel, China, anywhere, so that is suspicious. So you cannot block one single IP because it doesn't make sense. Every time it's a new IP. So probably let's assume if there is a subnet which can be blocked, or anything which can be blocked on the VPC level, that will add up a good amount of value here. Third, if you go on the database level or any query level, we should make sure like the OWASP top 10 at least is covered here. Now, we shouldn't know code of yours. Let's say when we take AWS, we have secret key, we have access key. We shouldn't encode that in our application. We can have it in our secret parameters probably, to make sure that every time it is encoded. So data in transit and data security at transit and rest is something which we should look forward for on the application and the database level. Perimeter level firewall, make sure you have a good extended amount of response. The threat intelligence of the firewall or the endpoint protection which you're using is very good. It is updated to what is happening in the market. The like whatever happens, like security is something which, what I personally feel is, the most weakest chain of the security is the person who's using it. Like you can have the best of security, best of this thing, but the user should be aware. Because sometimes what happens is, if we pay too much of attention to security, the productivity of the person or the whole agenda goes away. So it should be a balanced track of the productivity of the security and the user training here.
Okay. You
Yeah.
mentioned DDoS attacks, right? So
Sorry.
you mentioned DDoS attack.
Yes, yes,
How do you
yes.
prevent a DDoS?
So there are like you. there is no complete way that you can actually prevent a DDoS. There will be ports. Now let's assume it is 443. There's no way you can actually prevent completely 443, but you can just limit the amount of public subnet server which you are having. So you can now DDoS, I don't think there's a complete cure for DDoS. You can stop if you stop from port scanning. There might be chances that your other things which are getting port scanned. Now let's assume if you have SIM in the environment, SIM requires a port scanning to be done, but you should allow only those IPs of port scanning which is authenticated. Any other port scanning or DDoS which is from an unauthorized can be blocked. But DDoS will always be from a new IP always. So it is just that limit the amount of servers you have in public subnet, and you try to have your target audiences different so that you can have such set of policies.
So you don't need to do a DDoS attack prevention manually. There are a few AWS services for it. Do you know what services can prevent DDoS attacks?
So I have worked with GuardDuty, I've worked with Security Hub, but they will give you some measures, but I'm not sure if there is a complete single thing which we can prevent DDoS attack from. I'm not sure of that. Yeah.
Okay, right. So we've got services like AWS Shield, WAF, even now.
WAF Shield, yeah, WAF Shield, yes.
Yeah.
WAF Shield can be used, but will it completely deny DDoS? I'm not sure on that.
Well, AWS says.
Okay. Sure, okay. Because I've worked with WAF as well. AWS WAF is what we use. So since we had it on ALB, so we had our target groups attend, and we had AWS WAF enabled. So
Okay.
we have done that. And we have protected that with DDoS. That's what I'm asking. Is that way that it will prevent
That's
you DDoS from?
all. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
Hmm.
now let's focus on the Amazon EC2. So what are
Perfect.
the security best practices to keep your EC2 secure?
So first thing is probably you use a good OS on which you are hosting from. Now, let's assume that doesn't make sense if you're hosting an application in a legacy module. Good amount of like the software on which you're hosting it, it should be an updated patch version. That is the EC2. Then you don't allow security group should be only those ports. Your outbound port to by default is all allow. So you make sure that outbound port all allow is restricted to some restricted ports. Then inbound traffic also you don't allow all traffic to any of the ports or any traffic. You allow only those ports which you will be accessing or something. So security groups, I think basically EC2 or something. There are only two, three. One is
Hmm?
if you're restricted on VPC level, it is NACL and it is security group here. Then you have your OS on which you're hosting. You don't download. If let's assume I am a Linux person, so you don't download it from any random GitHub just because it is hosted. Just
Hmm.
make sure how many contributions are. Is the GitHub active? Is it a good? The contributor is a genuine person, or he is just doing it so that he can make some ransom out of your software or something. So it is just that even if you're using open source tool on your system to install, now there were many cases. I would say I would have this case mentioned to you. So what happened was we had our Jenkins in my previous organization. So we had Jenkins and we had downloaded it packages with like let's assume you see something on Stack Overflow, you'll just download it. You don't have any idea of will it work or not. You'll be like, okay, it doesn't work, and you'll just go to the next one. But you will not make it a point that you have to remove it or uninstall the package which you have installed. So this thing might give you a problem in your long term. There might be chances where your instance is compromised. This
Mhm.
is like a major problem. Basically, if your instance isn't public, if it is private, it is somewhere safe because it is happening through one public server and it is happening through NAT. So somewhere AWS will help you, but we can't expect completely.
Okay. So
Yeah.
how would you know that your AWS EC2 is compromised?
So I have had a couple of instances here. So one thing was one of my server was compromised, but this was in a public subnet. So I got a report from the AWS saying that my server is SSHing other servers in the data center. So I got a report saying that AWS that there might be then you might have unwanted services running. If you go to there will be some unscheduled crons. You might have never mentioned crons in your thing, but there are crons running on your instance. I'm referring to only Linux here. So crons might be running some processes on your system which you have never installed or something which is taking up your 100% your CPU. Major thing is your utilization, your basically your performance of the system, your any unscheduled activities which you are not aware of and which has been defined. And third thing is some external vendor reports such as AWS, which they shared me that your instance has been trying to loop in into another instance, is it where, because you are not supposed to do it. So we got a very clear report from AWS. So to do so, we installed a very good endpoint protector, and then we restricted our outbound and inbound policies, and
What are the
we
what
made
are
sure that,
the,
yeah.
I'm looking forward to what are the detective controls that you can put. What you said was that your vendor might inform that application is not working, and then you would go and try to troubleshoot it. What are the preventive and detective controls that you can put in so that you know beforehand, before a complaint arises, so that you are on time to, as soon as some threat happens, that you can actually pinpoint something. So, what tools can you use for that?
I'm not sure on the tools here, but as I mentioned, your performance utilization and your maybe unscheduled tasks on your instances, which you are not aware and it is running. So since you might have your everyday this thing, like since we monitor it on CloudWatch, let's assume it has been 99%, but there's no application activity which has been monitored. So you can have a regular monitoring of using CloudWatch. So that
Okay.
is what I know. I'm not sure of in
All
depth
right.
what you're, is there some particular thing which you're expecting?
That's
I'm
all
not sure on
right.
that.
Okay. Uh, Tell me the difference between CloudWatch and CloudTrail.
So CloudWatch is more like the instance performance level monitoring tool, and CloudTrail is your account level monitoring tool. So when, let's assume your AWS EC2 has been connected to S3 for some data. Let's assume it is taking some data, or a user. Let's assume you have gone to S3 to take this data. So Venkatesh has gone to S3 to take this data. This will be recorded in the CloudTrail. But on CloudWatch, you can expect your RAM utilization, your CPU utilization, any basically your syslog level of details can be expected in CloudWatch. And CloudTrail is your account level monitoring. So
Cool.
yes,
Okay. All right.
you can have CloudWatch agents installed on your EC2 for enhanced monitoring. Yes, you do that.
Cool. All
Yeah.
right. So let's assume you have got an application which is very, very data intensive for the transport. So you got a
Data what? Data?
you, it's very heavily data oriented, and
No, you
most of
used the
the
word data intensive, is it?
yeah. So on the
Okay, okay.
at a transport. So
Okay.
what I what I mean is that how would you secure data for transport in the cloud?
Your data,
Most of your
you're
data
referring
is in
that,
transit. So what are the key security features that you would implement to ensure that your data in transit is secure?
okay, so let me rephrase it. So it is like let's assume it is a EC2 here. Your EC2 is a data, it's a very heavy application. It is data intensive application. So you're asking how will you make sure any data which is going on internet or going to anywhere is secure, correct?
Yes, data transit is
Okay.
secure.
Okay. So if is it within the account, or is it how is it? Is it going
Uh,
to other vendors, or how is it?
yeah, the data can be sent to external vendors
Hmm.
as well as the data is within AWS as well. And
Okay. So
there is also incoming data from external vendors to your application.
okay. Okay. So somewhere of security can be achieved through your KMS, key management service, some level, like your at least in transit can be achieved. Now let's assume banks especially do it. They have this thing that customer managed KMS can be used. They don't want to have their data encrypted by any other person, be it your vendor or anybody. So especially banks do it. If it is some other vendor, you can always have your AWS KMS. By default, it wasn't enabled. Right now, S3 has by default KMS enabled. So that is somewhere your it can be used. Some best practices of some L1, L2 level to maintain your in transit at least happen securely. If I have to look for other ways, there would be maybe a good amount of good WAF, good SSL certificates. Then I think if you're using via API, you can have API security tools, which will give you somewhere if your data transfer or anything is happening via API, so you can use API security. If your data is transferring, you can use somewhere of your KMS tools. I think this L1, L2 level, so we can address using this.
And how about data encryption?
Data encryption, yeah. So that is what I referred for as KMS, yeah. So that is what encryption is the process. KMS is the tool which we're using. So yeah. Hmm. Encryption,
Okay.
decryption. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Mm.
Uh, let, I'm just thinking. So, can you tell me more about what is Amazon Guard Duty?
Okay. So if guard duty is like, let's assume guard duty where we used it is almost like your SIM tool of AWS. So what happens is, there were attacks from, if you enable it in your for your account, what happens is anything which is an anomaly, it takes your logs from CloudWatch and CloudTrail basically. So these are CloudWatch, CloudTrail, and probably I'm assuming somewhere of S3 activity also. It is monitoring to make sure that it will correlate all the events, and it will be like this is something which you don't usually do. So it gives you a list, it gives you an Excel sheet that your IPs has been going here. Is it wanted or unwanted? If there are suspicious IPs coming to your account or hitting your account, is it known? There are SSH from this server. Was it successful or not? Uh, if it is successful, you will not be monitored. It won't be monitored definitely. But if it wasn't successful, how does it happen? Your IAM user failed these many times. So was it human error, or was it something which was unknown? So it gives you exactly what a SIM does. On a on some level, guard duty acts like a SIM for the AWS account here. So
Okay.
if you integrate guard duty, it is like a one place where your SOC team can also monitor and give you use cases that how can you make changes, and if these IPs are allowed, you can just block it on your NACL level that it is not required.
All right. Uh, I'm now done with my technical questions. I would
Perfect.
like
Yeah.
to I would like to know about your experience in is there any project where you implemented the security end to end, and what are the key challenges that you faced from the developers?
So developers will always crib you to anything, because according to them, security is the last thing they think of. They like, we want this feature to be delivered. We will not. So this is how you do it. They are okay even if their PHP is running on 7. If the PHP is 8, 8.4, they don't care, because they have to change their entire code, the application which is running for. But now in my previous organization, we had I would say it was more like a this AWS well architected framework is what we had adopted. We used 4 pillars what AWS asked. So what we had done was our applications were hosted on PHP. So it was running on some X version, which is old one. We had to upgrade it to Y. So what were the measures which we took was, first thing is removing all your public to private. That was the first thing. Like if my instances were 10 in public, I ensured only 1 or 2. That too only if it is having, if it is internal, you don't have to be in public. It has to be private. Public I kept only if it is DNS facing, or it has to communicate with vendors. Then second thing was on the actual instances, you make sure a good endpoint protection is installed. It can be your XDR or EDR. Then you use the latest good patch, good OS on which you're running. The updated amount, like the updated languages version. Now let's assume if it's on PHP, you use the latest one. If you're using Dart, you use the latest one. Then that happens there. Then on the, if this is done, then what you can have this DevSecOps proper thing which is happening. So you ask the you if let's assume they're working on a feature. So what you can ask the developer is, you write your code on your, let's assume we are using VS Code. On your VS Code, we have a open source tool like SonarQube. So you can have the vulnerabilities tested of your language on the SonarQube before that is SAST basically. So we will have SAST implemented here. Then you send it to build. Once the build is done, there are manual testing done from the testers. It can be your automatic testing, or if there's some features, it can be manual. Then you can have your any package vulnerability which needs to be checked. So you can have a proper DevSecOps. So what I had done was, we used SonarQube, and we used for build server, we used Jenkins. I was somewhere reluctant to use Jenkins. I am Since I'm an AWS person, I wanted that pipeline to be used. We used Bitbucket. So the whole pipeline we had set. So it was not a complete DevSecOps, but somewhere if you see, at least some 80% of the vulnerabilities could be scanned with that. I have done some one, two like single-handed projects where I have taken small projects. I have taken it on code commit. It is on a particular instance. It builds, it gets tested. If it is working fine, it then goes and sits on the production. So I had like since there were some tutorials or something and some, so I did that code commit say build, code deploy, like the whole code pipeline I had followed. And in there, I used Sonar Cube for testing. So DevSecOps, DevOps, some small projects I've done. DevOps was done on a production level. DevSecOps I've done on some small level where one, two users use it for yeah. I've done that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how about can you tell me about one of the most challenging projects that you've done? Something which was accomplished after lots of thought process.
I would say this well-architected framework of
Mhm.
AWS. So since we were running on private, sorry, we were running on public. There were times where our instances got compromised, and since you are communicating with vendor and your IP, if it becomes, if even if the vendor gets slight, like if he gets slight doubt on the IP, he stops communicating with that vendor. Now let's assume if it's Paytm, and if Paytm stops it, and your end customers are your like, since I was in a finance company, so you cannot get payments basically if there are problem with your SSL certificates. It becomes too much of a thing. But if everything is on AWS, I have just one single dashboard where I can monitor everything. So since I am that AWS person, I try to put everything on AWS. This is head because I'm like, if anything problem, I'll use premium support. So that is I was clear on that. Anything happens, premium support is there to save us. So let us have one platform to measure everything. Yeah,
All right, that's cool.
yeah,
Yeah, I think I'm done with my questions, Venkatesh.
perfect.
So
Yeah,
I yeah, I enjoyed talking to you.
yeah,
I'll give you my feedback after I pause the recording. And yeah, thanks for
perfect.
your time.
Okay, done, done, done.